one thing, and I actually did put up on LinkedIn because obviously we know each other and we've had a number of chats. But your value proposition is exceedingly obvious and simple to understand. I've talked to people like, lots of Matt leaders, like, in fact, a video, did a fireside chat with Rowena Hackwood, who talks about, as a Matt, it's really difficult to buy into a company unless they can prove that they can save some money, because ultimately every 30,000 ultimately is a resource, somebody else you can bring in to help with the education of children. But your value proposition is that obvious. It's literally saying, if you do all these things, I will show you your savings.
Yeah, and I think that's the powerful piece on it. And I guess because I've sat around the table, and I think when I go and meet with operations directors or FDs and things like that, and I can have those conversations about it, because I understand it. My wife is an FD in an academy trust. He's talking shop a little bit too often, but having been there, and I think because I've been there for that period of time, and you build the relationships, and again, when I've worked with people like James Miller at Ormiston and Matty Sherwood at Brook Western, I built that relationship. We've been working with some of these clients for 12 years or so now. For as long as some of these trusts have been existing, we work with them. So you're seen as a trusted partner in there. And at the end of the day, we want to make a difference. And that's part of what drives both EO and Barker. Is actually, what do we do to make a difference at the end of the journey? If you're not using our dashboards, why are you paying us for them? If you're not actually making a saving with us in the long term, what are you doing? We've secured some trusts with the PSDS program this year. Between EO and Barker, we secured a third of the money that went into the academy sector, which was over £10 million. We've secured trusts through other programs, such as the Matt Loan Pilot program. We secured 10% of the whole pot that came out of the Matt Loan Pilot program. We've seen trusts make huge impact in their carbon footprint, where they're currently already at the 2035 target for the carbon reduction on electricity. We haven't got there on gas yet, but on electricity, they've already at the 2035 target, and they were there in 2019, 16 years ahead of target, and that's what we've already done. And when we're seeing the electricity prices going the way they are at the moment, actually, we've made a real impact on what they've done. And as you say, every £30,000 is a member of staff.
Yeah.
For an academy trust. So if they spend £30,000 with me and they're not getting that £30,000 back and another £30,000, we should be doing. And yes, there's some things that don't save money. The dashboards don't save money. Okay, so you pay £4,800 for one of our dashboards. It doesn't save you money. It's the actionable insights that it gives you that save you the money.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So somewhere, but if you look and say, okay, well, we bought EO's dashboards for 5 years, and we've done all these projects. Actually, if we hadn't had the dashboard, it might have taken us 2-3 times as long to analyse that data and understand what's going on. And that's what it's about. I can hopefully give clients tools to help them be more effective in what they do.
Well, yeah, but you can say the same about assessment for children, couldn't you? So there's lots of tracking tools, but those tracking tools aren't going to improve the child's, the way they learn or their style or, improve their progress. What actually improves the progress is the teacher and what they do about it. But what it does, it highlights that the child needs some intervention. And so, it's up to the teacher then to decide what intervention is the right way to go forward. And Barker's, by the way, they basically do the project management piece, I'm guessing. So
Barker's have got about 90 staff based out of Braintree, but got offices in Birmingham, London, Cambridge, but they do the project management piece. So again, they've got a whole track record of doing SIF programs, managing it, school condition allocation, and things like that. But obviously, over the last few years, we've worked very closely on the energy piece and the carbon reduction piece. So we've probably seen deploying £20 million of energy efficiency programs over the last 5 years together. Most of that in the last 3. So we've done a whole range of work around that, and as I say, we've seen the real impact in that. And I think part of what helps us when we have the conversations with the trusts, we've got the data to show we've done it. So if you want to say, okay, have you really done this? And we say, okay, and we've got the likes of Matt and Brook Western and things like that who can say, actually, yeah, we were consuming 100,000 kilowatt hours in January 2016. In January 2020, not 2021 because the schools were closed, we were using 50,000 kilowatt hours. Okay, and when that was 11 pence a kilowatt hour, 12 pence a kilowatt hour, that was a £5,000 saving. Does that make sense? When you're seeing electricity prices at 30p a kilowatt hour in schools at the moment, actually that's a £15,000 a month saving that they were having. If they hadn't done that, they will be paying, not now, but and they don't because of the way they buy energy, but for Western, but other trusts, we can say that if they hadn't done those sort of changes, they will be paying, as they double their electricity bill next year. And that's the challenge. Payback now on LED and PV has come from being 7 to 10 years to being 4 years. Does that make sense? Or 3 to 5, depending on primary schools, it'd be tighter because the consumption is there, and if you're doing emergency lighting, but fundamentally, you can get payback in 2 to 3 years on a PV array if you put that in a school, which is phenomenal. That's without feed-in tariff. That's without anything like that. You can get payback in under 3 years. And that's with the electricity price of the 30 pence. Hopefully it's not going to stay there, but so let's say it goes back down to 20. So the payback might be 4 years. Does that make sense? But if you're paying 30 plus pence a kilowatt hour a day as an academy trust, your payback on PV will be in under 3 years,
which is amazing. Absolutely amazing.
And also just the carbon piece and all of these. Now, PV doesn't make you any more energy efficient. All it's doing is buying your energy at a fixed price.
Yeah,
does that make sense? If you're trying to say, well, okay, yes, you are reducing some carbon over here. If you're buying your energy from the grid, you're not being any more energy efficient. You're just buying your energy more. So when people say PV is an energy efficiency solution, it's not. It's buying your energy at a fixed price and reducing your carbon footprint. You've still got to switch stuff off, and that's the best way of saving money.
Oh man, and that's the other side of it. Like you say, it's the carbon footprint piece.
Yeah,
the ability to reduce down your carbon footprint, which is a big thing at the moment.
If you look at the carbon footprint, schools equate to 22% of the government's carbon footprint. Okay,
22%.
22% of the government's carbon footprint is just because if you're taking FE and HE into consideration, it's more around about 30+%. Does that make sense? And so, okay, that's the government's carbon. That's not the whole of the UK. It equates to about 3% of the whole UK carbon footprint. So it's not in the scheme of the UK. It's not huge, but again, it makes a difference. And obviously, in light of COP26 next week and things like that, there's a whole range of focus on that, and the young people are engaged in the process. But Greenshore Learning Trust have worked with private funders. They're not waiting for the government to do this. We've gone and worked with private funders, and they have put LED and PV across the whole of their estate in 12 months. Okay, and they will have, looking at their SECR report that we're just working on at the moment, they've reduced their electricity carbon footprint by almost 50% in 12 months.
Wow.
Okay, and that, if you look at the long-term investment that's going to save them, based on 5% energy price inflation, which we're currently at 100%. Let's work on 5% going out over the next 20 years. They're going to save £9 million against what they would have had to spend out of their general annual grant. Okay, if prices had gone up by 5%, if prices have gone up, I haven't done the calculation yet based on a 30% electricity price, but you can guess that if you've got to buy 100% this year and then goes up by 5%, I'm going to be saving them more than £9 million. But that's the sort of scheme and savings that we're looking at with Academy Trust. And you have to take that long-term view on it. And I think, and this is where I have the challenge in the education sector, and I'm slightly distant from it, so I can say this. Head teachers are focused on the results at the end of the year, or they're on government policy, or the politicians are focused on the next election and things like that, whereas we are, as the private sector, slightly divorced from any of those challenges. So we can say, okay, if you did this, in the long term, you will save this amount of money, or if you did this, it would take this amount of carbon out of your skill, and that's the journey that we're trying to do. And Greenshore were looking at this as part of their overall strategy as a trust. They're saying, well, actually, we want to reduce our carbon footprint as a trust, as part of our social responsibility as an educational institution, as part of the community we're part of. And then how that links into air quality and all of those sort of things. If we reduce it, and it's very difficult because the generation could be 100 miles away from the school, so the CO2 that they experience is not local, but you're actually making those sort of opportunities.
It's interesting because you're right about the sort of head teachers are there to try and to improve on pupil progress. That's their main focus and priority, which is absolutely correct. And it's interesting. So, like, again, I'm going to go back to Rowena's interview. Ultimately, she was talking about that they've changed, even the name. So they don't call them head teachers anymore. They just call them the heads of learning. So then they take away the problem of building, the facility sort of management and sort of building management or facility management. So and do you see that happening more and more in Mats? Do you see that sort of like you guys who are educationists focus on the education? Absolutely, we'll give you everything you need, but we now need to take away, the.
I think it is. I think there's a challenge because head teachers like having control, and so therefore it's that balance, isn't it? And it's more about communication. It's all about visibility. And again, if you have dashboards and data, make that data visible about what you're doing to the principal. Actually, they've got something that's easy to look at, and you've got visibility about that. You might overcome some of those challenges. I think there is a desire, and again, it's about affordability, and so okay, if we and about recruiting staff and all of those sort of things. So I think there's a whole range of challenges. I do think there is that desire to put a better structure, better communication, especially in the larger trusts. The smaller trusts where you only 4 or 5 academies, I think it's still quite difficult to do that. But obviously they may often benefit more because actually they're usually in little clusters. So can you share resource in a different way? So I think that, again, going back to my PFI days, I went and did a conversation, and I had a conversation with the head teacher, and they said to me, I now know what a load-bearing wall is because of part of this conversation. And I didn't come into education to understand to have to manage load-bearing walls. I came in to transform young people's lives, which I think is obviously what Rowena was picking up on. He's saying, actually, you want the head teachers to focus on transforming young people's lives, not worrying about whether the roof's leaking or not. And I think that's where we have to support whether that, and I think it's again, they don't want to be worrying about the carbon footprint. To a certain extent they do, but they don't. They want to be focusing on the young people's lives, and I think that's the piece that we've got to try and help and support on, and that's what drives what we do as a business, is saying, okay, how do we provide you with the tools that mean that within a couple of hours conversation you can actually see, well, actually, yeah, the data does show that, and the data does show. Again, we've talked about this before, Nick. You want to reduce your school's carbon footprint. Most schools' energy consumption, 60% of their energy spend is where there's nobody in the building. Okay, now it might be community use, but 20% of the energy spend is between 10 o'clock at night, 6 o'clock in the morning. 20% is at weekends and school holidays. So you've got that 40%. Just switch stuff off. Okay, that reduces your carbon footprint. It reduces your operational costs. Now, some of that's hard to do, but when you're saying, okay, and this is where I come back to wearing my IT consultant hat that I don't wear very often anymore, and we've talked about. But okay, a huge chunk of that energy spend out of hours is running your servers, is running your air conditioning. So air conditioning and electricity to run servers had no value to teaching and learning. Okay, and you say, well, we've got no money to invest in cloud computing. We've got no money to do that transition. If you take your electricity bill, and there's a large amount, that could be £300,000 a year for that money that's being spent on air conditioning and on running servers, and say, okay, what can we buy for that £300,000 when it comes to transitioning to the cloud? And obviously, we've seen in the last 18 months the need for different solutions from a teaching and learning point of view. Everyone says, oh, we've got no money. But actually, if you think about it in the context of your energy bill, and say, well, actually, with that £300,000 energy bill, we can do an awful lot of cloud computing. If you look at what the services that Google and Microsoft offer, they're not expensive services to transition to, and you're probably paying for them already. Yeah. So actually, you're paying for it twice. You're paying for the service on site, and this is where I may upset people, but actually, there isn't the need for the servers on site, but actually people want there to be servers on site because they think, without servers on site, we haven't got anything to do. Actually, there's better things for you to be doing than worrying about the server that's in the office next to you and things like that. And that's where, as I say, is that journey. And that was part of the reason why, as I touched on at the start, we put in a central server farm. We worked with BT to build that central server farm for the trust back in 2003. And I got into lots of trouble with Vector at the time. We were obviously our lovely consultants. They said, well, why aren't you using the Vector frameworks? And I said, well, I'm using the Crown Commercial Services framework because I want BT and IBM to bid. I don't want the typical suppliers on the Vector framework to bid. Does that make sense? Because I want something that's transformational. That's what the Academy program was about. It was about bringing the best practice from business and bringing those experiences in. And yes, it got lost along the way, potentially about too much commerciality, about conflict of interest and sponsors making money incorrectly along the way from Academy. So it lost its direction somewhere along there. But fundamentally, we're supposed to be bringing in how do we use IT in schools and how do we bring it into business. And IT in schools is completely different to it in business because the children log on every hour and whoever's we'll go into work, we'll log on at 8 o'clock in the morning and we'll log off at 4. And also we're not trying to break it every time and work out how to hack into it, which is obviously what you people want to do. They want to work out how this works and how can we get it not to work. But so there's a whole range of different challenges between business IT and education IT. So I do understand that bit and I've experienced that bit. But I think we've got to work out how we help and how we and again what we're trying to do is I want to make myself redundant. I want my dashboards to be redundant fundamentally because that means I've been successful in what we've done. Because if people aren't buying my dashboards from me, it hopefully means that actually they've reduced their carbon footprint to 25% of what it was. They've reduced their energy consumption to 25% of what it was. They now understand how to manage their estate. They're just doing maintenance. They've not got big investment programs to do, but they're just managing the day to day and they've cleared the backlog. Does that make sense? But so that's where I want to get to. I want to get to a point where, again, Power BI will be able to be embedded a lot more readily into Teams and things like that if the trust's using Office 365 and things like that. So you won't need us because you should be doing it yourself. And the larger trusts should be on that journey now. They should be using Power BI. They should be integrating it in with Sims and all of those sort of things because actually it's a really powerful tool that will help them.